Hey guys, Bugcat7 here. Okay, it is Thursday, December 30th, 2021, and I'd like to thank you for visiting the Stonewall Research Channel here on YouTube. I really do appreciate it. All right, guys. Well, I did try to publish a video last week, but I took it down because it was just too damn long, and my videos are long enough as it is, but unfortunately, you got to explain a lot of stuff to get a complete picture of what's going on. And, we pay attention to the details here. That's where the real meat is. And, unlike other channels where I love the channels that have a lot of pictures and stuff like that because jam packed with a lot of information, and a lot of them are short and sweet, like the videos that a lot of the guys that have their own channels who follow me do, like Ziggy Dan and uh, Clint from Kronos and Dave from Electric Universe Eyes, and guys like Andrew and Phil with the ancient alternative view and ancient history criticisms. They're a bit longer because they do get into it rather deeply. So, but I do like those short ones with a lot of pictures and stuff. There's a lot of information there, but my channel is a bit more cerebral. So there's not a lot of pictures here, but we're going to cover the details of these things because that's where the real meat is. And as I've mentioned before, and as you might know from reading about anthropology or archaeology, there are several anthropologists and archaeologists today that are looking at the myths with a different eye. They're looking at it from the perspective that some of these ancient myths and legends might have some truths to them or have a completely different meaning beyond what we take them as we learn about them in school, etc. But they're looking at them more seriously, and when they're doing these things, of course, going to corroborate these things with facts and things, artifacts, the earthworks or, engineering constructions, etc., stone constructions, whatever it might be, you interpret it differently, seeing it through a new lens, through these legends and myths. So, what can we corroborate? What can be corroborated here? Was actual, fact, something we can see that's relatable, that has some relationship or germane sort of material that we can relate to the legends and myths of the giants in the areas that we're talking about. And in this video, we're going to be focusing on Micronesia because it's just fascinating. Some of these legendary chiefs that existed there, and what might corroborate these things. What can we know about actual factual contemporary um, stuff that would tell us a bit more, that might affirm or confirm our suspicions about the giants being in these areas ever. So I just want to refer back to this picture that was sent to me by a friend of the channel, this author Von Gall. She's on the West Coast. A very nice lady, and I interviewed her. She asked me to interview her, and I had that interview in the video library on my channel. And here's her with her little baby. She's adorable. So, very nice lady. She's written all these books, and she's current books focuses on Buddhism, and because she's a Laotian citizen, I believe she has dual citizenship, and she has many relatives there in Laos, back there in the South Asia there, and it's very interesting. The reason why we did this interview here was because she was interested in the tales and myths and legends of the giants, especially from where she comes from. Because there's this sort of anomalous sort of stonework there and other interesting things that seem incredible. And because also that the Hmong people specifically, who are specific tribal people in Laos there, have this recessive gene for blonde hair for some reason. Okay, it's just a recessive gene that comes from who and where and what, nobody knows. And why, nobody seems to know. So there's a lot of theories and speculation about it, but we can sort of imagine why that might be, because, whatever past that we don't know anything about. But that's, how she sort of got interested in it, because of this anomalous thing happening here when she's looking back into the history of her own country there and the legends, etc., etc. So she sent me this picture of the Fiji chiefs. Okay, so this fellow here was chief from 1920 to 2004, and here's the current chief here, the Kaliova Silawau of Fiji. Okay, so it seems to be that the people, because these people have different surnames here, okay, were a ruling class in the Fiji Islands and just happened to be 7.5 feet tall, okay, and not only tall but bigger, because this fellow right here is like 6 foot tall, right? Significantly bigger here, and unless there's such a thing as congenital acromegaly, then these people are all, this class of people are all this size. Okay, so just like the Hmong people with their blonde hair here, and what we have here is people with the recessive genes for the giant humanoids that existed there in Micronesia in the past. Okay, and here we have evidence of it in contemporary times, because there is no explanation for the height of these people. You say, well, there's basketball players. Yep, there are. And they got the recessive genes of the giants in them too. Because average height on this planet today is 5'79". Okay. And the scientists who work on the theories behind height and growth and the sciences involved with it have no explanation for anybody of this size and height, without there being some sort of medical condition associated with it. Okay, but the problem is that the ruling class of these people are all this height. And for something being so extremely rare, what they're trying to say here is these people have congenital gigantism or acromegaly, like they were trying to establish with the people in Ireland there, where they found clusters of gigantism happening there for some strange reason that they can't explain. Okay, but there were no such thing as giants in the past, so therefore there's no relationship there. It's just something they can't explain, and we're done with it, and we're not attempting to explain it. So if you're looking for something that corroborates any of these stories and legends of, chieftains there in Micronesia, well, what is this suggesting right here? All right, you have to ask yourself. All right, so let's look into these through a scholarly work. This is the kind of thing we do on my channel here. We get into the real meat and bones of the thing here to see what is actually being said. So here's an article here from 2003 written by this Robert Tenorio Torres. Apparently he's anthropologist working on this sort of thing. And let me just read a little bit of the preface here for you, and we'll cover a few of the stories in here about these chieftains here, and then we'll look at something else interesting about it. Now, before I even get into this, which I should have mentioned before I even get into this, is what are the megalithic type stoneworks, if any, to be found in these areas? Well, in Micronesia there's all the basalt column constructions there of these huge stones, was hexagonal basalt columns, broken down and put in place there to create, this area in Micronesia there. But there's also other things there that you probably have never seen, or maybe never have seen, or maybe perhaps you've seen them in passing. But for instance, the stone money of Yap. Okay, so here is just what they call stone money here, all various sizes, even down to, hand size, palm size discs. But the oldest ones seem to be these huge ones. And there's a lot of talk about it because there's been stories about it being how this stone money was like the original Bitcoin. Okay, so you can see the islanders here are lifting one of these stones that are like half the size of their body here. And how many guys can you get on one log? Unless the tree is, ultra long or something like that, that they use. You can only get so many guys on this log here to lift this thing. But some of these stones, just these, the stone money as they call it, not in Yap there, is huge. So look at this fellow right here, standing next to one of these things. They weigh several tons, and apparently they don't come from the island there, from Yap there. They come from some other island there, and they propose that they were brought back here by canoe somehow and placed here on island. The interesting thing about it is that you may own the stone money, you may actually pay for something with it, but they don't move it anymore from anywhere, especially these big ones here, because they can't. Okay, even if they put a log in there, it's not strong enough to support this thing. First of all, I can't get enough guys underneath it to lift the thing. So you may have the money, but it stays exactly where it is in somebody's yard or something like that. But of course, they use regular money too, dollars, I believe. They use. But some of these things are immense and they're ancient and they go far back in time. And actually, who's moving these things around? Well, I don't know exactly, but of course, we know about the profile points of the giants, of them working with stone and handling stone, etc., etc. And they're certainly much larger. There's a big difference between this fellow right here standing next to this stone, and then imagine this guy right here, these guys right here standing next to that stone. Okay, big difference there. Okay, so anyway, there's the stone money of Yap that you might have heard about, and these latte stones, which I'm digging this T-shirt here, thinking about getting that. Real cool stuff. With these latte stones in Guam, which are these ultra huge things here. You can see from this old drawing here what these things look. They make the people look extra small, I think. And they look in this thing. But also, this fellow right here, standing next to one of these caps. Okay, this is a Mariana Islands. So you have Mariana Islands and Guam all included in Micronesia here. So who's moving these things around and how? Okay, and let's say there are guys like this or even bigger moving these things around. Big difference, right? From average size folks that are like 6 foot tall and 200 something pounds, right? A little bit different. Oh, this guy's got acromegaly. Why? His whole family and then all his neighbors, they all got it, huh? It's ultra rare, but they all got it. Yeah, it's congenital in this case, of course. All right. Or there were different kind of humanoids in the past. And, frequently the people with acromegaly, they say they have thicker skulls, et cetera, et cetera. Well, so many of these giant skulls that dug up from the past had much, they were always, the people who were looking at them always said, they're much thicker. So, okay. But anyway, so they have these latte stones there, and they have this giant money there. And of course, all the, constructions in Micronesia there with the basaltic columns there. So all these big giant things to be moved around in the past. And certainly, if you're bigger and stronger, it's going to be a little bit easier for you than us average folks. All right, so let's get back to this article here. So I'm going to try to cut down on the time here, but we do have to comment on this thing. It's the discussion here, and that's the real meat of these videos here. Anybody can show a bunch of pictures and say, well, you just think about it whatever you want, which you can anyway, but, we're here for some of the discussion about these things and some of the supposing that we're going to do on our own. We don't have to leave it to mainstream academics to do all the supposing for us because they'll suppose it any way they imagine, okay, based on their training, of what to think and not how to think. So the fellow here says there is a substantial body of pre-colonial literature, folklore, and legends which has been collected by various scholars and organizations. Chamorro cultural history was altered and its traditions and values overwhelmed by those of the arriving foreigners. The stories and traditions that have survived have thus been filtered by 300 years of external influences. This paper reviews and provides a critical commentary on a selection of material available in print. So just keep that in mind about anything we hear about in the legends of folklore of anywhere and the influences that could have been happening on there for colonial powers, including, in the Americas and everywhere else, and how these things are all sort of twisted and turned and changed, in order for the invading and alien um, peoples coming in and what they hope to accomplish by manipulation. Okay, so the goal of this paper is to review the scope of literature and folklore of the Mariana group in Micronesia and discuss the emergence of a written body of literature from what was originally an oral tradition. Through the years, many of the legends, myths, and folklore of the islands have been transcribed from the oral and produced as text for all levels in primary and secondary education. In addition, with the advent of an increasingly literate generation of Chamorros and Carolinians, in terms of post-secondary education, there has also come about a new literature that is written for a regional audience as opposed to a national audience. The regional writing is in English, intended for a non-native English-reading audience unfamiliar yet interested in the Marianas literary tradition. National literature is written in the Chamorro vernacular and includes themes of ethnicity, identity, cultural traditions, as well as political themes in relation to history. However, since most of the population is bilingual, many new stories and texts are written in English and not in the vernaculars of Chamorro and Carolinian. Moreover, the issue of authenticity in authorship must be addressed since the oral tradition and native experience that has been appropriated by writers has become widespread following Western and European models in literature. Since Ferdinand Magellan's landing on Guam in 1521, the Marianas have been under continuous colonial domination through Spanish, German, Japanese, and American administrations. The effect of this on the oral literary tradition of the Marianas is pivotal when looking at the new literature being produced by the present generation of writers. Subramani writes that the literary oral tradition that existed before colonialism was broken by colonization and produced a fragmented history that is the fusion of various controlling influences. He notes that the quote, the new literature in English belongs to the period of disengagement and post colonial reconstruction, unquote, which is the way many native writers in the Marianas today are attempting to recover as well as preserve what is left of their culture. Okay, so I'm not going to read any more. But you get the drift, okay? They're trying to recapture the original oral traditions and what they said, and not all these bastardized ones by introduced by the colonists and the occupation armies there that did whatever they wanted. So it's just interesting that we take note that they say such a thing, all right? And these people are trying to get back to their roots. And just to also note, here in this sort of older book about these tales and whatnot, here's some of the legends and tales that are told in these societies here, and they cover all sorts of things. And this is all about the taboos of society. They cover all sorts of things, all right, that have to do with the behavior of people's behavior, how they should behave. And, they all have morals, morality plays, et cetera, including eroticism here on siblings, parents, and children, all this part of their culture about how they should behave in their culture. Okay. So there's all these tales here, including ones of cannibalism. Okay, taboos on cannibalism. So, um, what can be said about that except that I'm trying to find it here. I saw it in here. The Cannibal Bridegroom. Okay, right here, number 76 in Tales of Spirits and Men. All right, so again, the taboo of cannibalism in these societies. Well, what better to call another society somewhere else, another tribe, another culture somewhere, bad things like being cannibals? You know that they're not, but you want to call them that because it's a pejorative. All right, and you could probably include it in their culture. They'd be offended by that because they don't have cannibalism in their culture either. These are typical things that most cultures would talk about and understand. So let's get back to this. So anyway, we're gonna skip over all this sort of stuff here that has to do with the sort of explanation of how these things come about and where they got their information. Often we don't need to know that right now. You can read more about it. I could give you a link for it in the description here somewhere. But we're going to read about the legendary chieftains here and the interesting things that they say about them. Okay, they have their own creation myth, like most cultures do. Interesting in its own. And it's interesting what it says there. We could get into it deeper, but I just want, for brevity's sake, let's just cover the ones that we really need to focus on. Okay, so we're going to start here with legends of strength. Okay, I'm always talking about these tests of strengths that have to do with the dolmen and all these sort of Neolithic constructions, et cetera. They just, people want to believe there are all sorts of other things, but in reality, many of these things are tests of strength. And if they are tests of strength, well, it must have been some pretty strong dudes that were doing some of this stuff. And how big were they? So these are the tales about the legendary chieftains. Let's take a look at this stuff. How Godao became chieftain of Guam. This legend deals with the great Chamorro strongman Godao, and its theme is labor. Godao's labors began, according to the legend, in his effort to become head of all the chiefs of Guam. Godao was ordered by all the island's chiefs to perform three great tasks. First, he had to swim 25 times around the island. Secondly, he had to break a coconut tree into 10 pieces by hand. Lastly, he would have to level Mount Lam Lam, the largest mountain on Guam. After accomplishing all three feats, Godao proved his worth and was accorded the title of head chieftain. Godao's labors echoed the ancient image of the Chamorro chiefs as great, strong, and powerful men who could perform gargantuan feats beyond those of the normal man. Okay? So what is being said there is very interesting there. He had to be powerful enough to break a coconut tree into 10 pieces by hand. Well, I wouldn't imagine that anybody normal size today could possibly ever do that without a chainsaw and not by hand. And he's going to level a mountain. Okay, so again, we have giants, involved and associated with, large engineering feats, whatever they might be, leveling mountains, constructing canals, earthworks, stoneworks, whatever it might be. So, such tales of the feats of the Aboriginal Chamorro man and pre-contact legends were not uncommon. They reflected the spirit of the Chamorros, who prided themselves on extraordinary physical strength and other superhuman abilities. Even Mendoza's notes refer to Chamorros' brawns. They are as large as giants and of so great strength that it has actually happened that one of them, while standing of the ground, has laid hold of two Spaniards of good stature, seizing each of them by one foot with his hands, and lifting them as easily as if they were two children. Cited in Thompson, 1945. So these are some of the histories that were dug up from the Spanish, when they landed there and, found these giant humanoid people there. Okay. So Thompson's collection also contained a tale of two noblemen of Agana, Guam, who agreed that the stronger of the two would become chief. One squeezed a rock and a drop of water fell from it. The other threw a rock and it flew through the air like a bird. Seeing each other's strength, the two men then fell upon each other with clubs, with the loser leaping to the nearby island of Rota. So he leaped to an island. Okay, so again, what is being said in these legends and myths? It might have some fact, but there's so many of them. Why would there be so many of them? So, they're going to say, the naysayers and the people who are skeptics are going to say, well, this is just some sort of archetype that human beings have, the giant archetype or whatever it is, which has been mentioned before, as they, try to dismiss it as being nothing. Okay, when we have the evidence of these people in modern times. Sorry, but when there is no explanation for the height and size of these people, according to the scientists and academics that do science on height and growth, well, then it's open to interpretation now, isn't it, Mr. Scientist guy or gal? Just keep your flaps shut for a moment. The Legend of the Two Chiefs of Guam. This legend, collected by the Neves and Flores Library staff in 1971, has both ontological elements that account for geographical features and continues the tradition of legendary feats of the strongman, Gadao. It deals with an encounter between Malanguana of Tuman and Gadao of Inarajan. In a cast in, is cast in poetic form in the 1973 Guam DOE version told by Simon Camacho in Chamorro. The two chiefs are Alu and Pang, which, following their epic battle, produced the rock known as Alupang on Guam. It is also worth noting that the story Taga the Great, written by Francis S. Baker in 1975, also contains a version of Chief Taga's battle with another chief similar to the two previous compilations. In this version, Chief Alu, upon hearing of the deeds of a chief in another village, decides to find him and challenge him to a contest of strength. Unknowing to Alu, the other Chief Pang has disguised himself as a cook. Chief Alu shows his strength by shaking a coconut tree so violently all the nuts fall to the ground. Chief Pang, still disguised as a cook, nonchalantly counters this by squeezing one of the coconuts and grinding the meat in one hand to make a meal for his new acquaintance. After seeing what he supposed was just an ordinary man's strength, Alu wonders about his ability to conquer the chief he supposed he will have to meet and desires to return to his village. He asks the cook to take him there in a canoe. Once in the canoe, they each paddle in the opposite directions, breaking the canoe in half. But their strength is so great, neither notices. It isn't until Alu reaches his home village that he realizes the true identity of the cook. One possible reason for the variant in terms would be to explain the Alupang landmark on Guam. Another possible explanation might be to add the legendary feats of Chief Taga. By fusing the deeds of the various strongmen in other legends with the Baker version, it is also possible that the original legend may not have any actual names, as in the example given in Thompson's rival nobleman of Agana, and the ancient version served as an example of Aboriginal Chamorro brawn and strength. Legend of Chief Taga. This legend is of particular interest because there is a version on Guam that seems to be a variant of the Tinian tale of the feats of the great Chief Taga. Chief Masala in the Guam legend was a Tuatamana of prodigious stature, so strong he could snap a coconut tree in half. Chief Taga of the island of Tinian was just as gigantic and strong. He could lift a giant latte stone by himself, right? Latte stone. could lift it by himself. Like this one right here, he could lift by himself. Could he? Well, I guess you don't need a lot of ropes and sleds and logs and stuff to do that, right? Let's say the chief didn't do it by himself, but he got a bunch of his buddies, right? A few of them, whatnot, and moved it around. Whereas this guy here would have to call like 100 of us to do that. But just a couple of these guys is enough. Okay. Although the character descriptions and names were different, both versions coincide in plot and themes. Masala and Taga were strong and boisterous chiefs of enormous size, able to perform gargantuan feats. Each could build a huge latte stone house with the massive stones. Each also had a precociously strong son. The Masala legend tells of the son playing with a coconut crab that escaped and hid in a hole under a coconut tree. When Masala refused to help him retrieve the animal, the angry boy grabbed and uprooted the entire tree. Masala, seeing his son's strength as a threat to him, tries to kill the boy. The fleeing child leaps to the island of Rota, located between Guam and Tinian, a great distance away. There is a landmark on Rota called Punta Patgon, a child's point where the boy supposedly landed and lived in exile from his jealous father. The themes in this particular legend depict the obsessive pride of the Aboriginal Chamorro male, refusing to be outdone by anyone, even by their children. The legend also accounts for the child's footprint landmarks on Rota. Thus, there is supposed physical evidence that the Great Taga did exist. The great Latte stone ruins associated with this legend can still be seen on the island of Tinian today. These legends that tell of the Chamorro's impressive physical prowess bears testimony of the strong and proud people before the arrival of the Spanish conquistadors. The motifs reflect an almost godlike race of giants who ruled the islands without fear and performed great feats. I subscribe to the opinion that these legends remained popular during the Spanish occupation because they reminded the subjugated natives of a time when the Chamorro was in control of his islands and roamed them with pride, not even exceeded by their foreign intruders. The folklore that developed during the Spanish occupation is starkly different from that which preceded it. Tales of strength yielded to those of trickery and deception of the Spanish. Isn't that interesting right there? Okay. These are the kind of details that I hope you guys pay attention to. Okay. These are the kind of things that are not discussed in many other channels that may show these things because they're just showing a bunch of pictures that you're supposed to be awestruck by and just go, oh, and whatever you think, you think. But when you hear some of these details of these legends and myths, well, you can form a better picture of what might have been going on in the past here and what has happened, in future times when, other peoples were involved to corrupt these things. And that's what we have to sort of decipher now. I guess this article attempts to do that. The Legend of Asud of Guam. Van Peening's anthology included the legend of Chief Asud, who duped the people of Rota. Because Rota's great chief was dying, Asud persuaded them that he had an herbal cure. However, he claimed that he could only find the ingredients. He was given the most beautiful maiden on the island to accompany his search. His trick was that he convinced them not to give the medicine to the chief until Asud had excited the island's bay with the girl. Needless to say, the herb was worthless. The chief died, and Asud escaped from Rota with the maiden. When the Rotanese chased Asud to Guam so fast they arrived before him, Asud manages to outwit them by pleading a last request to walk 100 paces to the north and another 100 to the south before being executed. Asud again dupes the Rotanese and escapes into the jungle with the maiden and remained on Guam with her. The Asud legend motif is of the sham magician who escapes death by false appeal to his captors. It is of particular value because it marks a shift away from. Oh, I missed that. What happened to it? I skipped back again. It's a particular value because it marks a shift away from the legends of strength to those of deception and wit, the trickster themes of oppressed people worldwide. This predominates in the post contact legend as tomorrow became ever more controlled by the Spaniards. Okay, so you see why that might be, okay? It's not necessarily as a trickster giant, but they're applying some, moral tale to Spanish occupation, etc. Okay, so I just wanted to read a couple of the legend of these great chieftains, and as we've read about in the Americas, as we've read about elsewhere, there seems to be similar motifs and stories going on: test of strength, stone, shaping of earthworks, etc. Whatever it is, these tales sort of repeat themselves no matter where in the world you might go, where these interesting anomalous things are going on. And again, just to refer back again and again to the chiefs of the Fiji Islands, let's, just understand here what the peoples of the past may actually have been like. All right. All right. So I want to move on to this article here that was written by this Norwegian fellow that just so happened to sail around in his boat, in his, I guess, sailing boat, I guess, and he went throughout the islands of Micronesia there and sort of visited these places, I guess, as a destination. And, he sat down with these people and heard all these stories, and giants kept on coming up with these stories. He had no real interest in giants or, from his own experience in Norway, just, whatever the legends and tales were told to him, he just figured were legends and tales. But I'm sure he has a different perspective about the tales from his home country now. But whenever he talked to the people, when he sat down with the natives there and talked to the people about stories in their culture there, they would always somehow relate to giants. And he noticed that about this, and he started listening more carefully. Okay, he had no interest in the giants or anything about giants before he came here to Micronesia. So here he wrote a piece here, an article about his experience there and what was being said. So the giants of the Pacific Islands. The old men told me legends of giants, but I did not believe that they could be rooted in reality. Terry Dahl sailed his small yacht alone from Norway to the Pacific Ocean, starting in Oslo in 1983. For 4 years, he sailed between seldom visited islands until Kokoloko was run into by a ship in Solomon Islands. That's the name of his yacht there, Kokoloko. The old men on the islands loved to tell him their old legends about giants. Tourists thought they were interesting, but believed that they were fairy tales like the trolls of the Norwegian mountains. But now, so many years later, he's wondering if the legends could be rooted in facts. He's wondering so many years later. Well, so are we, Mr. Dahl. When I was sailing my yacht, Kokoloko, from one remote island to another in the Pacific, the old men always called me to their house to have a chat. Very often they would tell me of their old legends, and I told some of the Norwegian fairy tales. I was not interested of giants in those days. I liked better to learn about the old way of living on the islands, their traditions and culture. But so many times the conversations ended up with legends, and their legends almost always involved giants. And I soon realized that the islanders all over the Pacific, and not only the old men, believed that the giants had lived. Their legends about them were not fairy tales, but true stories. Yes, it used to be the duty of old men to teach their children the legends because the stories were their history books. I did not, unfortunately, write down all the legends I was told. For me, they were just fairy tales like those about the trolls in Norway. I did not at the time realize that so many legends have a root in the real happenings, but had been changed quite a lot by being passed from person to person through what might be hundreds of years or even thousands of years. The stone gods of the Marquesas Islands and Tahiti. The first island where I cast anchor in the South Pacific after crossing the Atlantic Ocean, going through the Panama Canal, and stopping briefly on Galapagos Island was Hiva-Oa in the Marquesas Islands. Here, most yachties coming from Europe did their immigration clearance to French Polynesia instead of sailing to Tahiti, and no wonder after about a month at sea. I did not, as far as I remember, talk with any old men about their legends on Hiva-Oa, but I had a look at some of the old statues of stone. In Panama, I have found my countryman Thor Heyerdahl's book, Fatu Hiva Back to Nature, 1974, in a secondhand shop, and during the crossing, I have been reading it. He and his young wife, Liv had settled down in the jungles of Fatu Hiva, but had become sick and had traveled to Hiva-Oa to see a doctor. Heyerdahl became interested in the ancient stone statues on the island, and old chief Tetua of Fatahiva later told him that they depicted his ancestors, white-skinned people that had come from a dry, hot country in the east. In the east, this was the very start of Heyerdahl's theories of migration in the Pacific. He later saw very similar statues in South America and heard stories about a white skinned and bearded sun god that had come from another land in the east and later sailed out into the Pacific, Kon-Tiki. Tiki is also what the islanders of the Marquesas Islands have been calling their statues for centuries. They are also said to depict gods. I took a picture of an ancient stone statue called Tiki Takai E on Hiva-Oa. It is about 2.50 meter tall and has 6 fingers. Later, I sailed to Fatuhiva and saw similar statues there. I also visited the place where the Heyerdahl's hut had been standing on an ancient stone platform. Tahiti is the main island in French Polynesia, and outside the Paul Gauguin Museum in the capital Papeete, I saw a stone statue similar to those of the Marquesas Islands. It is also about 2.50 meter tall and has 6 fingers. I later learned that it came from the island of Raivave in the Austral Islands, and that the men that were ordered to move the statue to Tahiti had been terrified the spirit of the god should harm them. Some are said to have died. I took a picture and touched the statue, but I did not feel any fear. The stone walls and fish traps of Huahin. On my way to America Samoa, I stopped on another of the outer islands of French Polynesia, Huahin. I rented a scooter and motored around the island and were impressed by the ancient fish traps and platforms walls of stone. I wondered if the Polynesians of the island had made this because the peoples seemed to have no traditions in building in stone, but I did not ask anybody. As far as I remember, I have now learned that the legends say that a demigod, a giant hero, was the man behind many of the structures. Yes, his gigantic canoe had even cut the island in two. And I saw the legend in this, and I read about the legend of Huhin there, and reading of the folklore there of the islands here, but you can't really see this picture too well. It's so small here. I don't know if there's a photo archive here anywhere, but the stone walls and fish traps of Huhin, well, it just made me think of my own video here. You can see me here. This is in the Green Mountains in upstate rural Connecticut in the middle of nowhere here. And it's very interesting where they dammed this brook here to make it fill up so they could harvest, fish, because they could farm fish here and harvest fish here. Have these very odd build outs in the walls here, and it's all for processing the fish there. They were not built by settlers or anybody like that. Okay, so very interesting constructions along this section of the brook here, which I go over here on my channel. I'm not just a guy sitting on a computer. Is out there doing this stuff, folks. And what you
There's
can
some
see
other
here is just
build-outs out here.
amazing.
Certainly, it's just a gorgeous
And it's beautiful there.
brick here for wall watching. And
Wall watching.
just gonna take a little walk down here. It's just magnificent here. Beautiful day, dry day. I was getting chilled the last few days. And I'm not in such great health myself, so it was hurting me. So, you know,
and I just want to show you this because a lot of people don't know about the actual research I've done on my channel.
Particularly beat up because every time a tree falls on it, it knocks everything into
these very odd constructions along the brook over here.
I mean, if I was managing this area or the property owner,
no
or whatever,
explanation
I'd try to clear
for
these
it.
trees. Always, you know, when I see this stuff, I'm always
very
trying to
odd constructions,
why,
and it had everything to do with processing fish, with harvesting fish in that brook there, where the brook was dammed there. Okay, just interesting that they have these stone walls and fish traps on Huhin there. I can definitely relate to that from my own personal research here. Okay, that's your friend Budcat here. If you're a new subscriber to the channel, well, you might not know about my own personal research here. I'm not just a fellow sitting behind a computer somewhere. Okay, I've been out there to look at some of these things, you know, in my own research. So it's all these things are relatable. The gigantic footprint in Samoa, on the outer island of Hawaii in Samoa, I heard the legend about a giant called Moso, and I found the way to what is said to be his footprint on the northwest coast of the island. May Moso eat you is an expression you can hear even today. When people quarrel or parents are scolding their children, Moso is said to have jumped from Samoa to Fiji, and his footprint is where he took off. You will find a similar footprint in Fiji where he landed. Fiji, where he landed. See, this is what the people in Fiji look like, okay? Just talking about stories here, folks, okay? And what can they relate to any sort of reality, okay? The tribe of giants, the Hiti, is said to have lived in Samoa before a great flood. Giant footprints in the lagoon of Tuvalu. My yacht, Kokoloko, and I visited the outer atoll of Namunea in the small Polynesian country of Tuvalu. The people showed me the footprints, quote unquote, after a giant in the shallow water close to the beach in the lagoon. 4 deeper and somewhat circular areas in the coral reef where he should have landed after fighting with another giant in the sky. The prints were after his feet and hands. Very interesting. And these pictures are so small, but you can go look them up online. You can see some of these pictures. The Footprints and Old Gods of Kiribati. I had, before I left Norway, read the book The Stones of Kiribati by Eric von Daniken, and I thought it would be fun to find the large footprints and graves he has seen in the village of Banreiba on Tarawa, the main atoll of Kiribati. I found the village and it discovered what was said to be footprints of a giant, his wife, and children in a schoolyard. They all had 6 toes. The largest footprint was about 1.5 meters long, and an early missionary had planted a coconut palm in the middle of the footprint to try to make the people forget their old unchristian beliefs. The kids were not afraid, but just played on top of them and had great fun showing them to the white man. A few years earlier, nobody would have dared go near the footprint. They were considered to be sacred and taboo. Von Daniken was also shown a 5-meter-long grave in where a giant was said to be buried, but he was unable to examine it. It did not manage to find the grave, but was later shown an open space in the bush that was very dangerous to visit because the spirits of the old gods. I sailed to the outer atoll of Butarotari, and a man named Baranico befriended me and took me to his house. His father-in-law was an old man named Koriata. He told me that Bararitart had visits of giants in the older days. They could fly through the air and were so tall that they had to bend the coconut palms away where they walked. I told Coriata about the Norwegian mythological gods of Valhall, and they had a pig called Sarimne, that the gods cooked the pig and ate all the meat, but that the meat had grown back the next morning. Coriata shook his head in surprise and told me it was almost the same with their old gods. They had a special fish. They ate the meat on one side, turned the fish around, and ate on the other side. When they turned the fish around again, the meat had grown back. So they just kept on turning the fish. Okay? So some of these things could be about fish farming, okay? Not that there was a giant fish that was just infinite meat on it forever, but they're telling the tales of ancient fish farming going on, as we well know about actual archaeology and anthropology done out there in the field, okay, that they're willing to admit to, okay, going back into the far past, okay. Island people certainly have fish as a major part of their diet. Okay, and I'm sure all these giants do, and certainly these chiefs of the Fiji Islands do. Raised on a fish diet primarily, probably with a little pork in there too, but where did pigs come from on these islands? There were no native pigs. And flying through the air, and so tall they had to bend coconut palms away where they walked. Okay, so, you know, what are they flying through the air? What are they talking about? Airborne vehicles? Okay, somebody's going to say right away, UFOs. Well, wait, before you get to UFOs, can we slow it down a bit and put it at where the next sort of proposed path would possibly be? And that's a more technologically advanced culture that has nothing to do with aliens. And maybe we could go there first before we get to the aliens. All right, so let's focus on that first. Then, after we can't explain it that way, then we can get to the aliens. All right, is that okay? All right, because maybe there was a homegrown race of humanoids in the past that had advanced technology that has nothing to do with aliens. Okay, they're just homegrown and grew up right here because we have a history on this planet that we don't know anything about. Okay, and probably couldn't get so far back enough to determine whether it was aliens or not. Okay, but let's stick and focus on the stuff that we might possibly know, like this stuff here and how it relates to certain facts. Okay, that you can see with your own eyes, right? The giant princess of the Marshall Islands on the small outer atoll of Lay in Marshall Islands, I was told an old legend of a huge hollow cylinder of timber that came drifting across the ocean a long, long time ago. The cylinder drifted ashore on Lay, and there were giants inside. They islanders were very afraid of them, but since the giants were weak from drifting across the ocean, the villagers managed to kill them. Then they discovered that one of the giants they had killed was a princess, and they regretted what they had done. So even today, the islanders throw a piece of food in the water to ask forgiveness when passing by the islet where the giant princess is buried, where they go out the passage for fishing in the ocean. I went fishing with the islanders in an open boat, and they told me the legend when we came across the islet. When we went ashore, and they showed me the place where the princess should have been buried in the bush, but it was not marked in any way. When we sailed out the passage, one of the men threw some pieces of bread in the sea as an offering. Okay, so what is this recounting? Is this recounting the giant genocide that took place in this part of the world? Like the stories of the giant genocides all over the planet? Well, I bet it does. Okay, but in this case, they regretted it. Okay? So, all sorts of stories about the giants, and even some regrets by regular people like us, to the giant genocide. The mysterious ruins of Namadal in Micronesia, on the island of Panape, in Federated States of Micronesia, there are some very interesting ruins called Namadal. I visited them 2 times when I sailed Loco from island to island. This ancient city of stone is built on nearly 100 artificial islets with tidal canals between them, situated on the southeastern side of the island. Bones of giants have supposedly been found both inside the ruins and also in the dense forest on the adjacent larger island. The local people of Ponape were afraid of the mysterious place and said it was full of ghosts and bad spirits. One legend says that it was 2 young twins, Alcipa and Alsopa, that had made Namadal, and they did it on one night by making the stones fly. Well, this would have made it more easy to transport the basalt logs from on the other side of the island, because some of them are 50 tons or more, too heavy to have been transported on bamboo rafts, as mainstream researchers say. Olisipa and Olosopa were said to have come from far away across the ocean, and they were much taller than the native islanders. Their offspring with the local women became the chiefs of the island, the Sadalur. Did you just hear what was just said? The offspring with the local women became the chiefs of the island. Huh? No such thing as giants, right? They're all suffering from acromegaly and gigantism, because it's so rare, right? That a whole lot of people are going to suffer from it, all concentrated in one area. There must be something wrong with them. Obviously, you have a medical condition. They're not normal like us. 5.79 inch, 5'0.79" normal size people. We're normal. They're not, right? And they couldn't have any recessive genes in them, right? Nah. Of giants? Nah. They couldn't have, right? Huh? Their offspring with the local women became the chiefs of the island, the Sadalur. Huh. End of the sailing, but more gigantic adventures in the Pacific. Loco was run into and damaged beyond repair by a ship in the Solomon Islands in 1987. I took a plane to Norway to see family and friends and to publish a book about my adventures, but I had a return ticket in my wallet. I was not ready to leave the islands and the people of the Pacific. After 3 months in Kiribati, I traveled to Tuvalu and met a girl on the outer island of Nukulele. I am getting married. Are you coming? Was the telegram to my parents. They came in time for the wedding, and they also visited the house of Emma Tomatagi and I were building in a local style on an uninhabited island on the coral reef, 3 kilometers across the lagoon from the village of about 300 people. The grave of the giant Tevalu. I enjoyed the simple island life on our island, fishing, growing a few vegetables in the sand, and feeding our chicken and pigs. And after 2 years, we got a daughter, Sonia. One day, a father and son archaeological team from Japan came to Nukulele. They wanted to dig in the middle of the main village, but I told them that in the old days, the village was on one of the other islets, Nyoko. Nobody was living in Nyoko anymore, but in the bush, the Japanese were shown an overgrown grave in a dense bush. It was very large, about 3.5 meters long and 1.5 meter wide. The islanders agreed that it had to be the grave of Tivalu, a very old legend as told by my father-in-law and another old man on Nukulele said that he had been a giant that had lived on this islet. Tevalu was a bad giant. He used to snatch children playing on the beach, kill and eat them. Okay, so the cannibalism story. Okay, we have this in all the legends of the giants everywhere. You got the good ones, you got the bad ones, you got the whole story here, and including apologies for killing them all. Okay, so I'm sure there were some bad giants, whatever, but this whole cannibalism story is nonsense. Okay, people who are advanced cultures and stuff are not cannibals and are not thinking about eating other people's children, no matter how big they are. The legend said that two brothers who aimed at his eyes with their fishing spears while he was sleeping finally managing to kill Tebelu. The islanders first wanted the archaeologists to open the grave, but then changed their minds. It was too dangerous, and a violent storm the same evening convinced them that they in the future should not make any attempt to disturb the grave of Tebelu. Oh well. The giant kings of Tonga. It was not so easy for us to get permanent permission to live in Tuvalu, even if I was married to Emma, and at one stage we had to leave the country to reapply for our visas. We traveled to Tonga, where I had never been before. Among Maui is a stone trilithon on the main island of Tonga Tapu. It is constructed from three coral limestone blocks. It is about 5 meters high, almost 1.5 meters wide, and almost 6 meters long. The legends say that the trilithon was made by the demigod Maui because no ordinary islander would be able to carry and construct a kind of gate of such heavy stones. One legend says the stones are from the Wallis Island, about 600 kilometers away, and that Maui brought them to Tonga in a giant canoe. Just some meters away from the Trilithon is a standing stone called Maka Nanga. The meaning is stone to lean against, and it is said to serve as a backrest for the king. Well, to use this stone as a backrest, he must have been extremely tall. That's the stone right there, the backrest for this Maka Pakananga. The royal family of Tonga used to be proud of descending from the giant gods, and they kept their blood by marrying within the family. They are still very tall. King Tupou IV, who died in 1996, was 2 meters tall, and his mother, Queen Salote, just 10 centimeters shorter. No explanation. No explanation by scientists who study height and growth. Yes, many of the chiefly families of the South Pacific can trace their family back to the giants, and some have reddish hair, as the giants supposedly had. They are often very tall, and it also seems common that they are more European looking with lighter skin, even if they can trace their families back to long before the explorers arrived. And I did read one of those legends of the red haired giants that was there, that they have one particular legend of a red haired chief being there with similar stories, all similar stories, tests of strength, building, engineering, shaping, knowledge beyond ordinary knowledge, etc., etc. Not giants, but climate refugees. We loved our island life, but suddenly something unexpected happened. We got cyclones with waves that tried to wash us to the sea. In Tuvalu, a country that is too close to the equator to have cyclones. Well, there are no mountains to climb on the flat atolls of Tuvalu. And Emma, Olav, and Teresa Sonia, we had that's a picture of them. We had our little daughter. We moved to Norway in 1995 and was called the world's first climate refugees by media all over the world. But Norway was too cold for us and too far away from our friends and family in Tuvalu. So after some years, we decided to try to move to Australia. And this time we also had a son, Olav. The tribe of ancient giants in New Zealand. Yeah, we have to add the giants in New Zealand as well. When staying in New Zealand to apply for our permanent resident visas to Australia, I contacted Martin Dutre, an American-born private researcher that for many years has studied what he believes is pre-Polynesian structures. He showed me carved large stones and shaped hills, but explained that the mainstream scientists refused to even have a look at what he had found. One of the reasons might be that the Maori of New Zealand today refused that there were anybody living in New Zealand before they arrived, even if many of their legends tell us about people that was there before them, like the tribe of giants called the Tikahui Tipua. Most probably because it is big money involved when it comes to the traditional ownership of land. Martin also told me about a female archaeologist who used to be a close friend of him. She had been working in the USA, and one day they dug up giant bones. All of a sudden, the U.S. Army turned up, and the archaeologists were ordered to dig the bones down again and say nothing about what they had found. Well, later she happened to tell Martin about it, and he put the story on his web pages. The woman lost her job, and Martin, a friend. I always wanted to see the giant statues of Easter Island. Isn't that a shame? Of Easter Island. I was always wanted. I have always have wanted to travel to Easter Island to see the giant statues there, but I have never had the chance or enough money. But it was when I did some research on the statues, Moai, to write an article for a Norwegian internet magazine, Sidav, South Seas, that I discovered that some of them had six fingers. Strange. Thor Heyerdahl of the Kon-Tiki fame, who led his first archaeological expedition to Easter Island in 1955-56, had noticed the same on a statue but decided to consider it unimportant. A pity, because he should have seen that some of the similar looking stone statues he took pictures of in San Augustine in Colombia in South America also had six fingers. Well, I thought it was very strange that old stone statues should have six fingers, and I guess what I discovered, so did many ancient statues all over the world. One legend on Easter Island is telling that the first people on the island had come over on the ocean from the west, while another is telling that they come from a hot and dry land to the east. In the east, they should have been 7.5 to 8 feet, 8.5 feet tall, 2.30 to 2.60 meters, survivors after a worldwide catastrophe. Jacob Roggeveen, a Dutch explorer, was the first European to sight and visit the island on Easter Sunday in 1722. He wrote that there were three distinct groups of people on the island: dark skinned, red skinned, and very pale skinned people with red hair. British explorer Captain Cook visited Easter Island in 1774, and his seamen described that some of the people on the islands were so tall that they could walk upright between their legs. I've written so far about 20 Norwegian articles about Easter Island because the mysteries of the statues and the legends might give a clue to who these tall people were. No large bones has, as far as I know, ever been found on the island, and just a few Caucasian-looking old skulls. New DNA testing of chicken, sweet potatoes, and people have showed early contact between Easter Island and South America. The resin on a mummy from Peru shows early contact from the west, all the way from Papua New Guinea. The bearded gods. The DNA testing has shown that Thor Heyerdahl's theories about migration were not the wild fantasies some mainstream scientists claim. Heyerdahl never mentioned giants, and I guess that was wise. It was a very complicated puzzle he was trying to put together, and to bring in giants would have made people believe that he totally had lost his wits, especially in a country where giants are trolls of the fairy tales. But we know that Thor Heyerdahl came everywhere across legends of white skin and blonde giants that often were called gods, and he followed the traces after them all the way from the Pacific Islands to the Caucasus Mountains. He called them the bearded gods. Thor Heyerdahl was first of all a scientist, and he led archaeological expeditions all over the world up till he died in 2002. His main goal was to research on our natural origin, on our cultural origins, and he always had a team of well-respected archaeologists with him. Giants and six fingers. All over the Pacific, I heard legends of giants and was surprised that the islanders always claimed them to be true stories and not fairy tales. But I did not try to figure out if there could be any truth to the legends before I discovered that so many ancient statues had six fingers, and that very often depicted local gods that were also very tall and what we call giants. I made 2 web pages under my SIDHAB domain to learn more giants and six fingers, and I've learned a lot about giants and can no longer doubt that a race of very tall humans have lived. Well, very tall humanoids have lived, not humans. 2 of the world's most renowned researchers of ancient human species, Professor Absalom Vekwa and Professor Lee Berger, are convinced that humans have been through a period of gigantism. They can even show us bones after them. Okay, I did an article about this Vekwa guy in the Russian news, and those bones that were found, I think, believe in the Caucasus. And then they disappeared. Just as quick as they found them, they disappeared all of a sudden in the 21st century. This was all done in the 2000s. But this was a long time ago. Beckler says the bones found in Borsham Gorge is at least 25,000 years old, and Berger says that the tall human race in South Africa lived for about 300,000 years ago. Where are the bones? But the legends in the Pacific about giants cannot be that old, can they? And where are the proof? Where are the bones and the giants on the islands? Well, Rotuma is an isolated island far north of the main islands in Fiji, and during the Second World War, coast watchers shall have uncovered shin bones over 1 meter long, and other soldiers shall have also found caves filled with giant human bones. No bones remain today, but two bones after one giant shall have been kept for people to see until quite recent time. You can see what is said to be graves of giants looking like dolmen made with large stones. Okay, so doming there. Namadal, Giant's Grave. Okay, several books tell that giant bones were found in Namadal, Ponape, but no bones are on display. The story goes that German Governor Victor Berg in 1907 defied a royal ban, opened a sealed tomb of former rulers, and found skeletons 2 to 3 meters tall. A wild storm ensued, and the next morning the governor died. In Kiribati and Tuvalu, there are some very large and old graves after what is said to be giants, but the people are afraid and will not let anybody open them. In Tonga, you can see the large pyramidal tombs of ancient kings and gods, also called Lagi, heaven, but they are not allowed to be touched, excavated. Many of the pyramidal structures and standing stones that you can see on Tahiti, Raiatea, and Huahin and Hine, and so many of the islands in the Pacific are connected to the legends of giants. Often they are said to have been their graves or temples, but again, no bones. The same goes for New Zealand. It has been written that some people living less than 300 years ago were very tall, and it is fact that people in the families of these giant gods are tall still today. According to the local newspaper, a very large skeleton was found about 7 feet below the surface on the Saltwater Creek spit, Timaru, south of Christchurch in 1875, but the bones were gone. Laughed at Thor Heyerdahl. Mainstream scientists once laughed at Thor Heyerdahl's migration theories, and it is first these days through DNA testing of sweet potatoes, chicken, and people that we start to understand that Heyerdahl was a brilliant scientist and not the Kon-Tiki adventurer. Heyerdahl said that the legends more often are ancient history books than fairy tales. More often, the archaeologists discovered that places and events described in legends, in fact, did exist. You just have to understand that the stories have been changed over time, that they have a different view of the world than we have today, and that they used other words to describe what they saw and experienced. Global cataclysm, and of course, the world might have changed too. So many legends from all over the world tell that giants were survivors of a global cataclysm. The books have always told us that we have had no such worldwide catastrophes, but this view seems to change. Something definitely happened about 12,000 years ago. Evidence clearly shows that we had a global climate change with a mass extinction where almost half the Earth animals died out. What happened? Well, there is physical evidence that a comet hit our planet at the end of the last ice age. So this could be the culprit. But Robert M. Schoch, famous for dating the Great Sphinx to a much older date than previously believed, asked if a solar outburst could have caused strong electrical discharges that hit Earth, melting glaciers causing water to evaporate and then precipitate as torrential rain. He believes that the melting of ice sheets kilometers thick would have released pressure on the crust and caused catastrophic earthquakes to tsunamis and volcanic activity around the globe. Builder gods. Thor Heyerdahl asked me on the phone if we humans might have gone extinct almost to the last man one or several times, and he wondered if we could have been the culprits ourselves, as so many legends and religious scriptures say. Well, I have in another article asked if the Denisovans, a newly discovered archaic human race, could have been the first giant kings of Egypt, and if their advanced technology capsized, quote unquote, the earth. The legends of Egypt, or the Atlanteans capsized the earth. They had advanced technology. The legends of Egypt tell about several periods for humanity. Zep Tepi, first time, was founded by builder gods, quote unquote, who came from an island that sank during a catastrophic flood. They recreated civilization from memory. You will find the same all we will find same all over the world, and many places like old Mesopotamia. The time before the catastrophe is called Golden Age. This was a time of peace and prosperity, with food enough for all without farming. It was a time when gods walked among the people, and these gods were giants. Scratch the surface. I've just scratched the surface when it comes to the legends of giants in the Pacific, because I have only looked into a few samples where I have personal experience. Of course, it seems silly to believe that four hollows in a lagoon can be from a giant falling from the sky, but so many legends tell us that giants can fly. Might be they had a technology that made flying easy without the need for a large plane, yeah, like a helicopter, and the footprints in the Kiribati do not have been set in stone by giants and his family's feet, but made with tools by people who wanted to remember, show how big the giants were. The legends have root in reality, but it might have been a reality different to what we experience today. To understand the legends of giants in the Pacific, and else I believe that we must take a closer look at all the megaliths all over the world, from ancient statues to dolmen and pyramids. It is hundreds of thousands, might be millions of them, and so often we have no good explanation on how they were made, by who, and what they were for. Were they made by a race of humans that had more advanced technology than we have today? Were they made in a hidden time we just started to uncover? Was the golden age real, and were they giant? So we ask, what do you think? And you can write, you know, comments here or whatever. I didn't write anything here, but this is pretty much what I think along these lines here, and what this Norwegian fellow says and questions about the giants and what was going on in the ancient past, and these legends in Micronesia there and other places, and all these things that sort of hint of the things that were going on. And of course, from the research on his channel, we can decipher it all and understand about some of these legends and myths telling about the giant genocide that had to go on, and about what these giants were doing in the past, sorts of engineering and earthworks and other things that could not be accomplished by normal sized human beings. These stones and these money stones, and these latte stones, who are they being carted around by, and where? And they're going across oceans, but by canoe, and all kind of giant canoes, huh? Well, the giant canoe could be a ship, but who knows? Stone money, gigantic stone money. I mean, come on, who's lifting this stuff and carving it up? All right. And then we know of the Fiji chiefs that live today and are actual examples, and they cannot explain other than saying that there's something wrong with them, and nothing's wrong with us, but something's wrong with them. Obviously, they shouldn't be that tall, so obviously they have some sort of medical condition that causes that. All right. Despite what we just heard about 2 seconds ago with all these legends. Okay, legendary chieftains, no less. We're not talking about myths and creation stories. We're talking about legendary chieftains that these people believe were their histories. Okay, and then you take a look at these people, huh? They talked about other giant chieftains being on other islands. Some of these islands, like Maori, that where they're not there anymore or whatever, but they had a different past. I'm sure they executed the giants just like the giants were executed all over the planet, except for certain places, like here in the Fiji Islands, for example. All right, they weren't all bad. Okay, maybe somewhere, just like in real life, with real people, with our people our size and our species of humanoid. Okay, there's some bad people, mostly everybody's good, and on the honor system when it comes to the laws and tribal customs and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so anyway, guys, think about these things. Think about these legends we just read about. I know it was a long video, but We had to get that all in, okay? This is what's going on. This is what's going on in this channel, okay? There's a different story about the past. There's a different story about the giants. And you should be ignoring all these other stories about the giants that people focus on with them being cannibals because they're not true, okay? There's no truth to them. Are they part of the legends and myths and tales of the past of these people? Well, they're trying to tell you about it. That was when the giant genocide occurred, okay? And it didn't have to be a reason, okay? Just people hating on each other. That's it. All right. So people with perfect teeth who obviously were not eating a lot of red meat because all the people who did had rotten, disgusting, putrid teeth. All right. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed that and end of the year video here. And please do think about these things, okay? And how they relate to the Giants and how they relate to the past and how they relate to the various profile points of the Giants and what they were doing in the past, all right? That we have evidences of, all right? The cannibalistic giant people have no evidence of anything. All they have is the stories, and that's it. Period. The end. Okay? And all the evidence on this side of things shows about a giant genocide that went on that probably didn't have to go on, but in the minds of the people that lived at the time had to because they were afraid. They were scared. Okay? Just like the giant feared the strength of his son there. All right. So anyway, guys, please do hit the like button and please do subscribe because you're going to hear a very different story than you're hearing anywhere else on YouTube or on the internet. Okay. Right here on this channel. I'm the only one who's doing it. Okay. Because that's what the truth is, folks. When you hear the profile of the giants of the past, there's little likelihood that they were cannibals. Okay. It's just a story we had against them so we could eliminate them all. That's it. Like we did with every enemy we ever had. Okay, anyway, guys. Bud Cat 7 signing out. Peace.